Good evening. Welcome to the Brock Environmental Center Learning Series webinar. Oiled. I'm going to start all over again. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Alice Christman. I work for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation in Annapolis, Maryland. Welcome to the Brock Environmental Learning Series going online for oil drilling, not in my bay. I'm going to hand over the program to Tanner Council.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Alice, for the introduction. Yes, this is our first online iteration of the Brock Environmental Center Learning Series. Again, my name is Tanner Council. I'm the grassroots manager for Chesapeake Bay Foundation here in Hampton Roads. Tonight's program is a continuation of a fairly popular program that we typically host in person at our environmental center in Virginia Beach, and which is also where we have our offices. And I would like to note that this program is made possible by the generous support of Gene Jenkins and Mike Newell, also of Virginia Beach. And while it is impossible for us to meet there at this time, I think that we have not only adapted this program to the current situation, but in many ways enhanced it. We typically hosted this bi-monthly, and until we can kind of get back to the new normal, we're going to be hosting these monthly. And while we do love seeing you all in person, we can fit a lot more people in this Zoom room than we can even in our large room at Brock Center. And I think that you will probably find the seats are a little more comfortable as well where you are. We have a lot of familiar faces, names in here, and I'm happy to see that as well. But one of the benefits is I see a lot of new people, so we're able to reach a broader audience on this format. So we're looking for silver linings here, and I think we found a bunch of them. Our topic tonight is offshore drilling, and this is an issue that is unfortunately not hindered by the current pandemic. Its progress at the federal level and as an existential threat to the Chesapeake Bay and our coastlines remain as evident as ever. So I really want to thank everybody for getting together tonight to explore these issues and learn some things that we can do even right now and also in the near term to protect our natural resources. So I'm supported tonight by our very special production assistant, Alice, and I just want to thank her again. Alice has been been with CBF for 15 years, and she's our senior manager of marketing in Annapolis, and she is sort of the woman behind the curtain tonight, so to speak. She'll be helping us out, and it really wouldn't be possible without her tonight, so I really want to thank you again, Alice. And we're going to move fairly quickly and consecutively through 3 presentations so that we can save room for a robust Q&A session at the end. And so to that end, I'd like to draw your attention to the chat feature that's here on your screen. And that's where you can add questions. We can reply quickly to some, but we can also stock them for the Q&A session. We can share other information and links on there as well. So stay tuned to that as we're going through. So hopefully you're all settled in. You've got your snacks and your beverage of choice. And I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers. Our first up, we're going to hear from Dr. Susan Barco. Sue is the research coordinator for the Research and Conservation Division of the Virginia Aquarium and Marine Science Center in Virginia Beach. Sue started working with the aquarium before it was even built in the 80s and has held many positions there ever since. She received her master's in biology from JMU with a thesis on, her degree was in biology, with a thesis on bottlenose ecology in Virginia. She later received her Ph.D. in marine biology at UNC Wilmington with a dissertation focused on ecology and conservation of loggerhead turtles in Virginia and Maryland. Dr. Barco is the primary author on 6 scientific publications on protected marine species in the Mid-Atlantic region, including bottlenose dolphins, loggerhead sea turtles, and humpback whales. Co-author on more than 30 other marine mammal and sea turtle publications. And Sue will be speaking to us tonight about the many threats offshore drilling and oil exploration poses to marine mammals. So we'll hear from her first. Second up, we'll have Emily Francis, who's a dear friend of CBF and a nonprofit strategist with New Dominion Solutions based in Richmond. She provides support to environmental organizations across the Commonwealth, sort of a jack of all trades. But for the last few years, Emily has advocated on behalf of the Southern Environmental Law Center to protect Virginia's coastline from offshore oil and gas development. She works in collaborative partnerships to advance good public policy that ultimately benefits communities and residents. And Emily will be addressing the Virginia piece, Virginia's response, and the history and the next steps to offshore drilling and gas exploration of the Virginia coast. Lastly, we're going to hear from Jay Ford, who is the Virginia Policy and Grassroots Advisor here in VA. He lives on the Eastern Shore, spends most of his time focusing on our legislative issues and strategies, as well as fisheries on top of all that. He has worked to stop offshore drilling for many years at the federal level and through 4 different Virginia administrations. He's hosted the Bureau of Energy Management, commonly referred to as BOEM, in Virginia, represented environmental tourism, aquaculture, and federal installation interests before the BOEM leadership and in public forums all over the state. He's also worked extensively on the legislation CBF and many other partners helped pass in Virginia this year, which we're going to learn about. As I mentioned, Jay lives on the Eastern Shore with his wife and 2 daughters on their permaculture farm called Shine and Rise. And Jay tonight is going to speak to us on what's going on also outside of Virginia and at the federal level. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Sue, who's going to talk to us about marine mammals. Dr. Sue Barco from the Virginia Aquarium. Thank you.
All right, let me see if I can get my screen shared. Is that you all seeing the screen? All right, I'm going to talk to you today about protected marine species and offshore energy exploration. And see if we can get going here. First, introduce you to some of the protected marine species that are found off Virginia. Talk a little bit about how these animals are protected and what threats they face, both in general and specific to fossil fuel exploration. And then talk a little bit about whether we can mitigate these threats.
Susan, can we have a quick second? I think we still need to share your screen.
It's not shared? Okay.
Yeah, we just heard from a guest that we need to get your screen shared. So if you go down to the bottom, you look for the little green box with a little arrow in it that says share screen. You click on that.
Yeah.
And we should get you going.
Let me see, I don't seem to.
So if you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, there should be a menu that pops up the bottom or at the top. Sometimes it's at the top. It's tricky. Zoom likes to play with you. So.
All right, I can see you, but I can't see.
So if you scroll, move your mouse to the bottom of the screen. You don't need to click on it, just move it to the bottom. You should see a share screen.
Here. It looks like I'm somehow out of the Zoom, not signed in. Let me try getting back on the presentation link.
We still see you, so we know you're here. Yeah, so.
I seem to get you to come up, that's the problem. Oh wait, there we go, here we go.
Okay, great.
Let's try this. Share the screen. Try screen 2. How about that? Not working?
Not working, not working.
Okay, try this again then.
All right, let's try it one more time. Try it again.
Share screen.
There we go. We're getting there, Susan. Just click on your PowerPoint.
Yep, getting there.
And then, yeah, you've got this. That's a very relaxing view. Ah, we're ready.
All right, start over again then.
All right, we're ready to go. We've got
Sorry about that.
No.
So today I'm going to talk to you about protected marine species and offshore energy exploration. And this is a bottlenose dolphin seen off the coast of Virginia Beach. I'm going to talk to you about what protected marine species are found offshore in Virginia, how these animals are protected and what threats they face in general and specifically from fossil fuel exploration. Talk a little bit about whether we can mitigate these threats and whether those mitigation strategies are appropriate. So the protected marine species that I am most familiar with are marine mammals and sea turtles, and all of those species have federal protections with those that occur off the coast of Virginia. There are also some fish and shark species that are protected, as well as deep water corals that occur mostly in our canyons. And this picture is a loggerhead sea turtle that has a satellite telemetry tag on it that's been released offshore of Virginia. Just to familiarize you, if you're not aware of it, marine mammals include the cetaceans, which are whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And there's a humpback whale, picture of a humpback whale fluke there. The pinnipeds, which are seals, sea lions, and walruses, and only the true seals occur in the Northwest Atlantic. This is a harbor seal picture. We also see sirenians in Virginia. We see the Florida manatee. And sea otters and polar bears are also considered marine mammals, but neither are found in the Western North Atlantic. What we're talking about with oil exploration off our coast is exploration off the outer continental shelf, or OCS. And there are OCS areas all along the coast of the United States, as seen here in a BOEM image, and you'll see this again later on in the presentation. But the area in green is the Mid-Atlantic OCS area, and that's what we're discussing today. So a little closer look at that. We see here the coasts of Virginia and North Carolina. The kind of light blue strip is the OCS area, and the gray lines indicate each state's OCS area. You can kind of see the continental shelf edge. It looks kind of jagged, and those little cracks in the edge are the canyons that are offshore. The one in the middle of the triangle off Virginia is the Norfolk Canyon. And if you draw a straight line due east from the Virginia-North Carolina line, this OCS drilling area goes about 240 miles offshore. So it's a really big area. Now, we don't know a lot about the animals that occur way offshore of Virginia. In fact, it's very hard to actually study these animals because it's a long way offshore. It's hard to get a plane out there. Ships are very expensive to do surveys. But with the use of telemetry and modeling, we actually know a little bit more than you would think we do about the animals that occur far offshore. So these are some maps from a couple of papers that I pulled. The one on the left is a paper from Kara Dodge and colleagues in 2014. And these are individual satellite telemetry tracks of leatherback sea turtles. All of these turtles were tagged off the coast of Cape Cod, and all of them went offshore into the OCS area. We also see in the middle upper map, this is a map that is a model of delphinid distribution, delphinid being all the dolphin species, so the cetaceans there. The warmer, brighter colors are higher abundance of these animals, and these are from shipboard and aerial surveys, and they've been combined together to create this model of where animals occur. You actually see more animals in the outer continental shelf area than you see on the inner continental shelf. So there's a lot of animals out there, and they're quite abundant off the coast of Virginia and North Carolina. Then if you look to the right, that's also a model, and this model was developed from individual tag data of loggerhead turtles. This is Megan Winton et al. The middle one was Jason Roberts et al. And this is showing that there are loggerhead turtles all along the continental shelf, but then off the shelf edge, off the coast of Virginia and farther north. And then individually, Dan Engelhaupt and colleagues have provided a report of individual tag data from large whales that have been tagged in the Norfolk Canyon area. The first two images on the left are from sperm whales, and the one on the right that has a big loop is from a fin whale. And all of these animals were originally tagged off Virginia waters. So we know there are animals out there in the area where this offshore oil exploration may occur. Now, these animals have different protections in the United States. All marine mammals are protected in the United States by the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And if there is an activity that might harm these animals, there has to be a permit. Permits for things like commercial fishing, dredging, underwater construction. And when a permittee applies for a permit, they have to indicate how many animals they may take under the Protection Act, and whether the take that they have will be relatively low level, just harassment and very short term, or whether they may seriously injure or kill an animal. And I would argue that right now we really don't even have enough data to determine how many animals might be taken by offshore oil and gas exploration on the outer continental shelf. The pictures here are from aerial surveys, 2 humpback whales in the rectangular picture, and the very tall, thin picture are 2 right whales, again, taken off the coast of Virginia. The Endangered Species Act protects some marine species and populations. All US sea turtles in the Atlantic coast of the US are endangered or threatened. The Atlantic and short-nosed sturgeon are endangered fishes. There are several shark species and populations that are covered by the ESA, and the deep water corals that occur in some of our canyons are also covered by that. And then there are international protections as well. The CITES protection is an international trade legislation that prevents the trade of endangered animals. The Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, produces a red list that indicates different populations that might be vulnerable to human activities or to going extinct. And in the US, although it's not specifically conservation, we also have a lot of fishery councils and fishery management groups that manage commercially fished species. And these also may comment on some other activities that could affect marine or could affect these marine resources. Now, we work primarily with marine mammals and sea turtles at Virginia Aquarium, and we see that these animals are actually succumb to a lot of threats off our coast. These are all images from Virginia. Animals can become entangled in fishing gear, and that's both recreational and commercial gear. We see vessel strikes, like the long thin picture at the bottom is a fin whale that was carried into the Norfolk Harbor on the bow of a ship, but vessel strikes can occur with small vessels and small animals as well. Animals can become entangled in debris, like the Kemp's Wrigley in the middle that is entangled in a weather balloon, or can ingest debris, like the pieces of plastic that you see in the top small picture that came from the stomach of a harbor porpoise. Harder to really figure out their effects, particularly long-term, are things like contaminants, noise pollution, and harassment. And the ones that are circled are really the things that we are the most concerned about from oil and gas exploration. But what we really don't know anything about are the cumulative effects of all of these sort of small insults that animals may continually be exposed to. So if they're continually exposed to noise, or continually have a low level of contaminants, or are continually harassed, how does that affect their long-term survival and health? We really don't understand that. Now, when people think of oil and gas exploration, the primary threat they think of is of an oil spill. But before any well or platform is even constructed, there's exploration. And the primary tool for exploration for oil and gas in the marine environment are seismic surveys. And the American Petroleum Institute, or API, has put out a lot of information about seismic surveys and how benign they think that they really are. And I just want to point out a few things about these surveys that I think show that they may not be quite so benign. So a seismic survey is a survey where a sound source is blasted towards the bottom, and that sound then penetrates the various sedimentary layers and is reflected back to the surface. And so a ship with a sound source, kind of an air gun, also tows a very long hydrophone array. And so it creates the sound and then listens for the reflected sound. And through data processing, they can figure out what types of sediment occur below the surface. Oil and gas reserves are generally associated with certain types of sediment. Now, there are surveys that are very broad scale. They're called 2D surveys. They're not quite as loud. The decibel level of the sound is not quite as intense, and they give a very broad picture of what's down there. After analysis, the geophysicists may say, hey, let's look at this area because this looks really promising, and they'll go back and do a 3D survey with a much more intense sound source that can then penetrate those layers a little bit more deeply and provide more information. And so this is the primary way that oil and gas that we explore for oil and gas. So this is an image of a ship conducting a seismic survey, and directly behind the ship are these air guns that are towed. And then off to the sides are 1 to 3 miles apart are 2 very long hydrophone arrays that may extend up to 5 miles behind the ship. When these surveys are conducted, they conduct the surveys at 24 hours at a time, so day and night. They can operate in very rough seas. And again, as I said, they can be either broad scale or fine scale. And the air guns may go off continually every so many minutes or so many hours. And the mitigation measures that are proposed for these and that have been used in the past are that the ship posts observers to look for marine mammals primarily, And then they also listen using hydrophones for animals making sounds. And if they either see animals or they hear animals, then they're supposed to shut down their operations until the animals move farther away. Now, I would argue if you're operating 24 hours at a time, that it's very hard to see animals at night. And we have very little information on the vocalization rates of many species. So just because an animal isn't making noise doesn't mean it's not there. So these mitigation measures are not necessarily particularly useful, I don't think. But the American Petroleum Institute says that doesn't really matter because there's been no documented scientific evidence of noise from air guns used in geological and geophysical seismic activities that adversely affect marine animal populations or coastal communities. So this is what they're saying and what the federal government, BOEM, is also saying. But if you just take a brief look at the literature, you see a lot of papers out there that talk about the effects of seismic surveys on fish, marine mammals, and turtles. And in fact, there are effects. They may not be lethal effects, but there certainly are effects. These surveys do affect animals out there. And although a couple of the papers here are more recent, this particular API document came out in 2014. A lot of these papers came out before 2014. API also tells us that seismic surveys in the Atlantic should not cause any deaths or injuries to the hearing of marine mammals or sea turtles. And that probably is true, unless an animal is directly under an air gun, which the API says their mitigation measures will not allow to happen. In fact, it may not be harmed directly by the noise. But think about it for a minute. These are animals that use sound as their primary sense, kind of like we use light. If someone suddenly shines a very, very bright light in your face, how are you going to react? You're going to try to get away from it. You're going to shield yourself from it. Well, if there's a very loud sound, how is a marine mammal going to get away from that? If it's a deep diving marine mammal, or even if it's not a deep diving marine mammal, it's going to need to come to the surface, because that's where the air-water interface is where the sound is going to be dampened the most. Well, if you're a deep diver and you've been at depth for a while, coming directly to the surface can actually harm you, because marine mammals and other species probably have certain behaviors that keep them from getting the bends like scuba divers get. But if suddenly you have to come from a very deep area to the surface in order to avoid a really loud sound, you could get the bends. And we think that has happened in some cases. So although the sound itself may not hurt animals, we believe that their behavioral response to the sound could very much cause significant injury or mortality. Now, I don't have current permit applications because I wasn't able to get them, but prior to the moratorium on drilling in the OCS from the Obama administration, there were 9 different permits that had been submitted to the National Marine Fisheries Service to conduct seismic surveys in the mid-Atlantic. Every one of these 9 included the waters off of Virginia and North Carolina. There were 9 different sets of surveys because every one was for a different petroleum company, because those companies don't want to share information. They all want their own survey. And so this is a very good argument for the fact that harassment, if the only thing that happens to these animals is that they're irritated by these sounds, they can't find their prey, they can't talk to each other, they can't hear very well, it's probably going to be a continual amount of sound out there once this exploration starts happening for quite a while. Now that's just the surveys. We all know that oil spills can be catastrophic, but there can also be small cumulative effects that happen. The most recent catastrophic oil spill was Deepwater Horizon, and there are effects from the oil, from the dispersants, and actually from the cleanup. We know so far that there have been long-term health or temporary, at least, population effects to bottlenose dolphins, Kemp's-Ripley turtles, a number of pelagic fishes, including bluefin tuna, plankton communities, and benthic communities following the Deepwater Horizon spill. And I just don't think we want that to happen in our area. So, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I think we're going to shift to Emily now. Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Just pulling up my slides. Just double checking, are they there for you? Can you see them?
I can see them. They look great. Thanks,
Great.
Emily.
Excellent. So thanks to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for organizing the learning series and for the invitation to be here with you all this evening. Again, my name is Emily Francis. I'm a consultant and I'm here on behalf of the Southern Environmental Law Center. And I want to share with you just some additional information to make the case that offshore drilling just isn't worth the risk. Of course, and to update you on some good action that has taken place by our elected officials in the 2020 General Assembly session that we can all celebrate and be happy about. So in addition to the impacts on marine mammals and other aquatic species that Susan just described, residents and localities in Virginia have significant onshore concerns about attempts to drill for oil and gas along our coastline. So here are three particular concerns that we've heard for quite a few years. First of all, the environmental and public health risks that come with onshore infrastructure. So increased pollution from refineries, from storage facilities, from pipelines, and even increased traffic in communities from the increase in industrial activity that comes with offshore oil and gas drilling. Secondly, an additional concern is offshore drilling poses significant threats to the U.S. Navy and to other military activities in Virginia. Obviously, a significant economic engine in Hampton Roads, as well as critical for our nation's military preparedness. And of course, threats to long-established major economic engines for the region and for the state. So that includes tourism and commercial and recreational fisheries. And I've pulled just some of the coastal economic numbers associated with tourism and commercial fisheries for the state. So tourism, obviously a big business here in Virginia, and along just the coastal region for the state, that's over $5 billion in revenue. And you can see the tax revenue that supports localities. You can see the jobs numbers and of course the salary numbers here as well. And obviously seafood in Virginia, also big business. We're the largest seafood producer on the East Coast. And you can see, $1.4 billion in sales and the good hard work of our working watermen and women along the coast and the amount of seafood that they're bringing to shore. So significant jobs and significant economic impacts are at risk if offshore drilling were to occur off our coast. I am a huge fan of this map that the Southern Environmental Law Center created. To me, I'm a visual person. This map to me visually demonstrates that there's literally no place for oil and gas drilling off our coast. There's a lot going on this map, but let me orient you to it. So obviously on the left-hand side of the slide, you've got our coastline. So a little bit of Maryland, we've got the eastern shore there, the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and the main stem of the bay, and of course the Virginia Beach coastline. Now off to the left, that triangle is actually very similar to the triangle that Sue showed us on a previous slide. That is the federal waters, the outer continental shelf, waters off our coast. And you can see the dark red there, a little bit of a rose color, but the dark rose color, that is where active military operations are taking place. And it's specifically where the Department of Defense said that no oil and gas activities should occur. So that is their definition and their words as they talk about and think about the federal plan for drilling. Additionally, you can see around Wallops and also around the Dam Neck facility, the dark black lines, that is the danger zone that's outlined because of the flight facility work that they're doing and the launches that are taking place there. So obviously places that we don't want active oil and gas activity as well. And sprinkled throughout the map, we've got the green boxes, the green blocks. Those represent fishing hotspots. So again, kind of the significant threats to our military and to our commercial fisheries. Those are hotspots that have been identified by NOAA. And again, Sue mentioned the canyons off our coast, and we've got those delineated on the map as well. So both the Norfolk Canyon and the Washington Canyon, with good, important biological diversity in those canyons as well. So again, just kind of visually representing the conflicts of the uses for our off-coast, offshore waterways, and the work that's happening off our shore. There really is no place for drilling. So given all of this information, it is not a surprise that over 200 localities up and down the East Coast have passed resolutions opposed to offshore oil and gas drilling. And here in Virginia, you can see that we have over 25 localities, and these are some of them listed there, that have done the same, expressed opposition to oil and gas activity off our coast. And so, I mean, honestly, it's clear that no community should be threatened with this risk. And so to help protect Virginia's coastline and coastal communities from that threat, we've obviously seen residents and nonprofits and localities and obviously state elected officials over the years that have been speaking up loud and clear. And that momentum has been growing for quite a few years and been getting louder and louder. And so in addition to the localities that are listed here, we've had entities like the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission that unanimously voted to express their opposition to offshore drilling off our coast. We have business associations that have done the same. That includes the Virginia Restaurant, Lodging and Hotel Restaurant, Lodging and Travel Association. We've got the Virginia Beach Hotel Association that has expressed opposition to drilling. And of course, the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast. This is not all of them, there are more, but I just wanted to call out a couple of those business associations. There's also a very robust environmental community, not shocking, that has been organized around protecting the coast for years. So again, I'll name a few, but there are quite a few in the community. Lynnhaven River Now, Surfrider, Sierra Club Virginia Chapter, Oceana, and of course the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Southern Environmental Law Center, among many, many other groups who've been fighting and working to protect our coast for years. And as Sue mentioned as well, I mean, we have just passed the 10-year mark for the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, where billions of dollars of damage occurred and the loss of lives. And the impacts from that disaster still continue to ripple across those communities and businesses in the Gulf. And so the concerns are real, and the concerns about offshore drilling have been long-standing. Bottom line, it is just not worth the risk. And many of you on this webinar have probably taken action on this issue. So I want to thank you for that. If you've responded to an action alert, if you've made a phone call, if you've written a letter, if you've done more than that, I want to thank you on behalf of all of our organizations. Thank you for the work that you've done. And I honestly think it's because of the facts on the ground in combination with the action of many, many communities and individuals across the Commonwealth, that it's because of those actions that in the 2020 General Assembly session, we finally saw good public policy pass in this realm on offshore drilling to protect our coast. And so obviously this was policy that was years in the making. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So the protections that passed, House Bill 706 and Senate Bill 795, they did three things. It's identical bills that passed. The first thing that they did is they removed language on the books that said the Commonwealth supported federal efforts to explore and develop oil and gas off Virginia's coast. The official position of the Commonwealth, so Governor Ralph Northam's position that he has expressed to the federal government during this offshore drilling process, is that he, on behalf of the Commonwealth, opposes offshore drilling. So that official position has been shared. And obviously you saw the list of localities who've expressed their official positions. And so we really did need to remove that language that said that the Commonwealth supports offshore drilling. And so that thankfully was removed in these bills. The second thing that these bills did, or that they do, is they prohibit oil and gas infrastructure from drilling rigs that are in federal waters from entering our waters. So if the federal government were to proceed with drilling off our coast, any of that infrastructure, so pipelines, or any of the infrastructure that carries oil and gas onto our coast. None of that would be allowed to be permitted in our waters. We control from the coastline 3 miles out, and the feds control from 3 miles beyond. And so since we can only control our 3 miles, that is where oil and gas infrastructure is prohibited. So that's significant policy shift, important policy change for Virginia. And lastly, the bills remove language on the books that describe where oil and gas royalty payments would go. So obviously in an ideal world, there would be no offshore oil and gas drilling off our coast. And that would mean no royalty payments. And in the past, royalty payments have kind of been dangled in front of localities or in front of states as financial incentives to support offshore drilling. But as we've already described, it's just not worth the risk, and communities would prefer to have robust tourism and aquaculture and fisheries and military preparedness instead of things related to offshore oil royalty payments. So these bills were introduced by a couple legislators. So Delegate Keam, Delegate Mark Keam, who represents part of Fairfax County in the House of Delegates. His chief co-patrons in the House side were Delegate Nancy Guy, who represents parts of Norfolk and Virginia Beach, and also Delegate Shelley Simons, and she represents part of Newport News. So on the Senate side, it's Senator Linwood Lewis, and he represents the Eastern Shore as well as parts of Norfolk and Virginia Beach in the state Senate. And I am happy to share, folks may already know this, but these bills passed in a bipartisan fashion. So protection of our coast and our coastal economies and our coastal communities is not a partisan issue. This is the list of the 60 delegates in the House of Delegates that supported the bill. If you know your delegate off the top of your head, and if you see your delegate on this list, I would encourage you to send an email or pick up the phone and give that office a call and thank them for their vote during the General Assembly session. And then this is the list of state senators who voted in support of the bills, in support of protecting our coast on the Senate side. And again, bipartisan. We've got 26 of the 40 state senators who supported this policy. And again, if you know your state senators, if they're on this list, pick up the phone or shoot an email and thank them for their efforts. These bills were officially signed by Governor Northam on March 25th. They're going to go into effect on July 1st. That's when the protections will occur. They'll begin to occur. And as I said, I mean, these are really good, important policy improvements here in the Commonwealth, and very important for our environment and for our coastal economies. But they only impact the environment and the land here in Virginia. So action at the federal level is still very much needed. And I am happy to turn it over to Jay Ford at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation to talk more about the federal efforts and the work at that level that needs to happen next. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily. Emily Francis, New Dominion Solutions. And our third and final, Jay Ford, Virginia Policy and Grassroots Advisor, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Hey, Jay, it's Tanner. Just want to make sure you unmute.
All right. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. Great. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I'm really excited to be with you this evening on a topic near and dear to my heart. It's a tough act to follow, cute sea animals and a big state victory, but we somehow managed to do it with what's known as the universally most beloved topic, and that's federal regulation. So hold on to your seats. We're gonna start moving. So the offshore leasing process. Oil and gas resources off of our US coast are a national resource. So it's something we all own in common, much like our state park or our federal parks and potential fracking grounds. These are things that the national government stewards on the behalf of all of us as the citizens. So in order to access those resources, you have to get permission from the US government in the form of a lease. That process is run by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. And they do that through the development of a 5-year oil and gas lease plan, which has 3 steps. And that is the draft proposed program, which is followed by a comment period of 60 days, a proposed program, which is followed by a 90-day comment period, and then a proposed final program, because the federal government, they like everything to sort of sound the same, which is followed by a congressional review. And a congressional review, that sounds very serious, but it's not. It is essentially when Congress gets an opportunity to look at the plan, but it's not really an actionable step. So for our purposes as advocates, we're really focused on those first 2 steps where we have the opportunity to, 1, provide written comments from organizations like SCLC, the Aquarium, CBF, and you as citizens, but also to get our localities, our state governors, members of Congress, etc., to all weigh in. So you'll see here at the bottom, we're still operating under the 2017 through 2022 plan from the Obama administration. And that's because we don't work under a 5-year plan until that entire plan has been finalized. So we will continue under that plan until a new plan has been finalized. I also want to quickly pick up on a thread that Emily mentioned, and that's on revenue sharing. And that's because revenue sharing is something that gets thrown out a lot and dangled as a potential selling point to states up and down the coast. And it's important to note because revenue sharing is only guaranteed if offshore drilling occurs between 3 and 6 miles off the coast. There's federal legislation that says if you pick up where the state line ends and you go 3 miles out there, it's called Zone 8G. Again, it's federal. They didn't want this to be easy for you to understand. But 3 to 6 miles, revenue sharing is guaranteed. As you'll have noted from Sue's presentation and Emily's presentation looking at these maps, none of the proposed areas would fall in there for the most part. So there is no guarantee of revenue sharing. To further complicate that matter, that means that they would have to go to Congress to ask for special legislation for any kind of revenue sharing to occur. And the chances of that happening are very slim. So if somebody is dangling revenue sharing out there as a potential reason to move forward, they are selling you a song. So in December 2016, we got a pretty big announcement. And as you'll note, this 5-year process, it can be reinitiated by any administration. And so I often call offshore drilling the zombie issue. And that's because every time you win, somebody could just restart it. It doesn't matter what your argument is, the thing might just get back up if you have a new administration that says climate change is a hoax and we're going to leave the Paris Agreement, hypothetically. If that were to occur, they could bring back this zombie issue of offshore drilling, and we will have to reinitiate this entire process of written comments and making these arguments. So it was a very big deal when in December 2016, the Obama administration announced they would not open the Atlantic to drilling, but also that they would permanently ban drilling in portions of the Arctic and Atlantic Ocean under the Outer Continental Shelves Act. And it's really important to note that that act does not allow for the reversal of an action. So if a president takes an action under the Outer Continental Shelves Act, there's no provision to roll that back. You'll notice in a slide why that's important. Additionally, as we've talked about, the Norfolk Canyon was included in these permanent protections. That's a critically important area for marine mammals. It's also critically important because for something to happen in that area, the Chesapeake Bay would almost certainly feel the impacts. And we're back. We have a new 5-year plan. The zombie has resurrected. And in 2016, the current administration announced that they wanted to significantly increase oil and gas production. So they issued an executive order And the executive order did three main things. And that was to direct BOEM to restart the 5-year plan process. The second was they attempted to reverse the permanent protections that had been put in place in the Atlantic and the Arctic in 2016. And the third thing they asked the BOEM to do is to speed up seismic permits and to review the oversight regulations that had been passed in the wake of the BP oil spill. And by review, they meant to water them down a bit. They wanted to streamline this process to increase lease approval. So in January of 2018, the step 1 of that 5-year plan was released, and that's the draft proposed program. And that plan would make available for leasing more than 90% of all of the offshore leases that the US offers. And you'll recall that Sue showed you a map of what all of that looked like. And here you can see the maps look very similar, except this time, these are all of the areas they put on the table to lease. It would have essentially opened up the entirety of the US leases to offshore drilling. Really an unprecedented opening was included in the draft proposed plan. So right now, we are between steps 1 and steps 2. And so where the executive order, as I mentioned, tried to roll back those permanent protections that had been put in place in December of 2016, environmental groups took that to court. And in March of 2019, a district judge ruled that that attempt to revoke the ban in the Arctic and in Atlantic Oceans was illegal, and that only Congress had the authority to do that. And so the current administration appealed that decision and announced that they would delay the release of the proposed program until the court battle worked itself out. And so that is sort of where we are right now, is in this limbo between steps 1 and 2. But as we'll talk about in a second, I think that's actually a great opportunity. So who is BOEM listening to in the development of this 5-year plan? They are listening to state governors. State governors are specifically listed as someone that they have to consider the decision, the opinions of when they're making this determination. They also have specific guidance that says they have to look at economic impacts and environmental considerations. Historically, they've also considered the opinions of state legislative bodies, and of course, the current administration as the person that's in charge there. The trick is that the weight of any one of these considerations is not prescribed in the law, meaning that an administration has wide latitude to sort of do as they see fit, or to make sure that this process runs according to a policy proposal that they have. I want to thank the Southern Environmental Law Center for this excellent slide. I think it points out that there is strong bipartisan support from the governors. And again, the governors are someone that's specifically listed in the BOEM process. And you can see here, up and down the coast, that the governors have, of both Republican and Democratic states, said that this is not worth the potential downsides, and they do not want to be included in a lease plan. So one might look at this map and say, surely we won't drill in the Atlantic. Unfortunately, most of these people were on the record before the draft proposed plan came out. And so this, there's no indication that they're going to step off the gas at this point. So we're between steps 1 and 2 in the development of that 5-year plan. But there are a couple other moving pieces in the federal process. And one is the seismic testing that Sue talked about in detail. And so seismic is handled through a different regulatory process. Again, because federal regulation is the most fun place to spend time. There's a completely separate process for the seismic. So the incidental harassment authorizations have been issued And Sue alluded to these, and what these are is, it's essentially a permit that says if you accidentally take, they use the word take, but what they mean is if you accidentally kill some marine mammals, you're covered because we've issued you this permit saying these are the parameters. And so these have been issued, which is essentially the primary hurdle to starting seismic. And so as a result, seismic testing really could begin at any time. There have been lawsuits filed to block seismic up and down the Atlantic. Many of those continue to play out. One early result from the courts was that the judge essentially said, it's unclear what this administration's timeline is, and so you cannot make a case that seismic is imminent, which is sort of a reflection on how this process has been running, is no one has any idea when these things are going to move forward. They theoretically could, but as things stand now, we have there are many lawsuits in the hopper to block seismic, and we'll certainly keep you updated if anything moves there. On the congressional front, the members of the House have gone at this issue from a couple of different angles. They've brought legislation to specifically block seismic and offshore in different bodies. They've also brought budget measures to pull out any money from the interior budget that would go towards drilling in the Atlantic. None of these measures are really moving forward because of the stalemate we have between the House and the Senate, but they were still strong messages to the administration that the members from these coastal communities are not supportive. 10 years ago, we had the BP oil spill, and there was, in the aftermath of that, a number of protective regulations were developed in order to make sure, theoretically, this would never happen again. As I mentioned in the EO, the current administration revised many of those regs and has attempted to streamline that process. Just 2 weeks ago, the Natural Resources Committee released a report highlighting concerns over some of these rollbacks. And the main three things are the well control rule, the offshore inspection and enforcement, relaxing those oversights, and then trying to pull back accountability for safety and environmental performance. So that was a recklessly fast run through federal regulation. Thank you. Again, on a very compelling topic. But where we are with this, what is essentially a stalemate right now between these steps, I think that provides us as advocates an excellent opportunity to fill this space with additional voices. You saw from Emily that we have a lot of coastal communities that have passed resolutions opposing offshore drilling. If you're in a community that hasn't, consider talking to your local officials. Let's get them on the list. Other things you can do: thank the governor. The current crisis with the coronavirus has sucked all of the air out of the room, rightfully so, but we still want people to know that we're really grateful for what happened during this legislative session. So letting the governor know we're grateful, letting him know that this is still a top priority for people is critically important. And then write to your state legislators and talk to them about offshore drilling. If they were on the list as supporting, tell them thank you. If they were not on the list, talk to them about why they weren't and see if we can get them there. And finally, please sign our petition. I know our amazing production assistant is sharing that with you all now. That petition will be incorporated into the eventual comments from the Bay Foundation when we respond to the phase 2 of the 5-year plan. And that helps us magnify our voice and let the administration know that we're talking for a lot of people through the region. So thanks so much. I'll kick it to Tanner for Q&A in our brief time left.
Thank you so much, Jay, and to Dr. Barco and Emily. We are going to switch over to Q&A now, but I'll just echo what Jay said. The links to those advocacy actions that you can take right now from the comfort of your armchair are very, very important, and they are there and visible in the chat section. Now I'm going to kick it back over to our illustrious Wizard of Oz, Alice, to share some questions.
Hi, I'm gonna pull up my beautiful Q&A slide here. We can't get started until I have my pretty Q&A slide. Ah, well, now I lost my questions. All right, so I do know that there's a question from Jim Deppie, and this is for you, Jay Ford. He wants to know, with oil prices going down to, I think, less than $20 a barrel, what kind of appetite that the Bureau of Energy Management or other pro-drilling industries may have. Has this had an impact?
Sure. So it's an interesting question, and I think it really cuts two ways. And so one is, obviously that's going to suppress the initial interest in additional exploration. If the juice isn't worth the squeeze, they're not going to move forward with it. It costs a lot of money to go through this. That being said, low energy prices, specifically low fossil fuel prices, does create an imbalance in the energy market at a time when we're trying to move forward with sustainables. And that, to be frank, is really where all of our energy should be focused. The availability of cheap fossil fuels is very tempting for administrations that are looking for ways to sort of jumpstart an economy in a short period of time. And so I think a lot of us are going to be paying attention to see what happens post full lockdown and what the arguments are that emerge, as people will all be jockeying for position and making arguments for the best ways to restart and jumpstart the American economy. And I think all of the advocacy groups are going to be working hard to make sure that slipping back into old habits with fossil fuels is not on the table.
All right. We also had another question from Cindy R. Cindy wants to know if there's any oil drilling happening on the East Coast now. And I'm going to open this up to everybody. I'm not sure who's the best person to be addressing that. Any oil drilling on the East Coast? We can also circle back with Cindy too.
There is not.
Okay.
It's a pretty simple answer.
Oh, thank you, Emily. Thank you. And I actually have a question about seismic testing. So the purpose for seismic testing is to see what marine life are in the waters. Are there options to seismic testing that we're not using, or?
The purpose of seismic testing is not really to see what marine life are there,
Okay.
to understand where the oil and gas reserves may be most prevalent. And there are certain sedimentary types and layers that are associated, correlated with oil and gas reserves. And so that sonic test helps to identify the particular sediments that might be most closely associated with oil and gas. So it's a way to look and see where they should try to drill.
Mm-hmm. I have a question from Rich Alexander. Do we have an idea of the ranges offshore where we think oil companies most want to drill on the shelf? So it sounds like they're trying to figure out where the most popular place to drill might be.
Yeah, so that's been one of the arguments we've heard from industry advocates, and that's largely the data that's out there right now is so old that they feel like they can't make an educated guess about that. The existing seismic surveys, which are now decades old, it showed some potential deposits along the North Carolina and Virginia border, which is why a lot of us have always been concerned about this potentiality. And I would say, more importantly, why are we looking? Maybe who cares? So if offshore is an unacceptable step, then seismic is a pointless waste of resources, and it really just throws fuel on the fire to entice people down a path that we don't want to go down, because it's not a couple year commitment. It's a decades long investment at a time when we need to be going in the other direction.
Yep. Oil drilling, not in my bay. Tell you what, I think in the interest of time, we are going to have to wrap up this Q&A. And move along. Some actions that you can take care of, that you can do, that you can thank the governor, you can contact your legislature, and you can also sign the petition that Jay mentioned earlier. And I believe Tanner's my production assistant now, and he's furiously putting some links in the chat below. And moving along, we have some other webinars coming up with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation on Thursday. You can see my shining face again. We're going to talk about blue crabs, claw and order. We've got Ken Slazek, a fantastic educator, and Chris Moore, one of our scientists, who will be talking about blue crabs, everything from where they live to how they're doing this year. And Tanner, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about, we may have some activities coming up with the Brock Center again online.
We do. We'll be hosting our next webinar, Brock Environmental Learning Series, same bat time, same bat channel. It's going to be on June 9th. And the topic is going to be fisheries, where we're going to be talking about some of the iconic bay fisheries and aquaculture, specifically focusing on oysters.
Yeah, interesting. Fun. So you'll be getting an invite from Tanner soon.
We will make sure everybody here hears about that one very, very soon.
And that is a good point. I just want to bring up that we will also, when Tanner follows up with everybody, he's going to send you a recording. And I know a big, huge thanks. He's an extremely grateful person. If you want to stay in touch with CBF, these are the different social media handles. Please go to cbf.org/give. Today is Giving Tuesday, so it's 2 for 1. 2 otters for the price of 1. Haha, get it? I have no audience, so I know you all are laughing. You otter save the bay. So I see Emily smiling. Susan's smiling too, and she sees these animals all the time. But today is Giving Tuesday, and we'd appreciate any support you can for clean water. But honestly, your time is something that we are extremely grateful. And when it comes to time, we also want to thank our speakers as well. Tanner, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to you, Alice, Sue, Emily, Jay. Thank y'all so much for making time, and a special thanks to everybody that tuned in, that's been coming to the Brock Learning Series. And for those of you that are new, please join us again, or for one of the other great webinars that Alice is helping to produce these days. So
yeah.
Thank you all again so very much.
And one more quick note, I know I've seen some other questions coming through, and we may have run out of time, but we are recording those questions and can get back to you offline. So this will not be the last you hear from us. And we always like to end our webinars with a little bit of our moment of Zen. And this is courtesy of the Virginia Aquarium and Marine Science Center. A volunteer was out on a whale watch, and Susan, if you want to set this up a little bit better than I could, but I love this picture. The whale is breaching right on the shores of Virginia Beach.
Sure, this was a great opportunity. This whale breached apparently several times, and we put volunteers on whale watches to help with our photo ID efforts, and she happened to get some just fantastic shots, and this is one of our favorites.
And I think this is why we do what we do. Thank you all, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.